Welcome to STEAM Powered, where I have conversations with women in STEAM to learn a little bit about what they do and who they are. I'm your host, Michelle Ong. My guest today is Dr. Jessica McCarty. Jessica specializes in all things satellites, wildfire, and agriculture, and works with organizations such as NASA and the Arctic Council on a range of fascinating problems around the relationship between humans and the world around us. Join us as we speak about fire, climate, and people, and what Jessica describes as home economics on a global scale. Good evening, Jessica. Thank you so much for speaking with me today on STEAM Powered. I'm really looking forward to this second attempt at having this conversation.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it's wonderful to join you again, sitting outside again, as I try to let my little one sleep, and I also can speak as loudly as I need to to do this interview.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine is currently unwell, so she is sleeping in our bed
Oh,
and
no.
hopefully staying asleep and sleeping off her cold. So we'll
Yes.
see how that goes.
Oh, we just got through that, so I understand. Yeah. Ugh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Cool. All right. So starting from the beginning, how did you get into geography and public policy?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I think the short answer to that is simply that I was willing to say yes, to some very odd requests. So the thing I did for my PhD was that so I'm a specialist in satellite data and I work a lot with NASA. I have been funded by NASA since my master's degree. And in January we'll actually start as a civil servant with NASA at NASA Ames Research Center in
Congratulations.
California. Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. I'm going to give up my tenured professor position, which is a bittersweet, but I'm looking forward to contributing to national
Yep.
and international science policy. Um, so what I was doing was using satellite data to try to map all human-caused fire in the lower 48 states of the US, which is a big area, right? It's larger than all of Australia. So, um,
Yeah, not
you
a
know,
small task.
so it's no small task. And I was doing lots of field work across the US. I was so young at the time, my older brother had to come with me on field work just so somebody was old enough to rent the car because US laws are that you have to be 25 to rent a car, um, which was fine because my family owns a farm and he had just started his own farm, so it was good to have him with me, I would say, at times. Um,
Yep.
but the result of that work was that I calculated the impact of human-caused burning in agricultural landscapes, the impact on air quality and then carbon emissions. And several nonprofits who were working in Europe and Eurasia came to me and said, "Would you help our colleagues in Eastern Europe and Russia learn how to do this process?" And me, being an early career person, I was just like, "Sure." Because someone read my paper, right? Like it was a big deal. Wait, you read
Yeah.
my paper? So I said yes, and then I started working remotely with people, both in um, so at the time, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Russia, and then also from that work, I started working with kind of a famous group in Vienna, the EASA, which is
Mm,
kind of this Cold War era um, Institute of Science and Technology in Vienna, which has all the OECD countries represented there.
that's
So,
cool.
yeah, it is a really cool and everyone who works at EASA outside of, Vienna they're also quite brilliant, so they're a great team to work with. So meetings started to be planned, and they were asking me if I would be willing to travel, and I can't stress how much being willing to say yes to international conferences, particularly ones where you're not necessarily going to present research, but you're going to be there working and listening to diplomats, listening to government officials. Very helpful to understanding how science can interact with policy. These are hard
Yeah.
meetings to put on your resume and CV for sure, because they're not, learned societies or professional organizations. But But you're
Yes.
actually talking to the people, and you're in rooms with people who are making high level decisions, and you are still presenting science. And so it was really just because someone asked me and I said yes, and I was willing to do the work, that I started getting into it. And I would say that the people who know me IRL do not find me very diplomatic. I'm My friends and my family, I would say, probably don't find me very diplomatic. But I'm actually pretty good at it on an international stage because I recognize my position in the room. I guess like human geographers would call this positionality, but I recognize like I'm
Hmm.
there representing a certain country, and that country represents these certain policy wishes and standards. Okay. I'm also an independent scientist. So here are the things I'm also representing on my own. And just kind of being
Yeah.
able to understand that everybody is wearing multiple hats in the room. And then, as much as possible, being polite and collegial about it, even when you're disagreeing. So just trying to
Yeah.
be as polite about it as you can. Sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, I was in this meeting once where this older Siberian man, I thought he was gonna strangle my French colleague. Like, I really did. I mean, these 2 guys were just, and it was all because my French colleague was, smiling and shaking his head yes when the older Russian, scientist, was disagreeing with him, and this is they had crossed cultural wires where it
Yeah.
looked, yeah, it looked very, like, dismissive, and this younger man was not giving his elder due respect, and so I had to just kinda, like,
Yeah.
step in and be like, "No, it's okay, this is what some French people do, he's not making fun of you," you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I do think sometimes women play that role of peacemaker, um, maybe naturally. Um, though again, in real life, people would, I think, find that they have to play peacemaker with me as opposed to me playing it. Um, but in a professional setting, I'm able to do this, and so that's really how I got into science and policy. Now, I do work on 2 things, fire and agriculture, where
Yeah.
I'm just surrounded by dudes all the time. And so,
Yep.
it's also quite helpful maybe being comfortable. Um, Still occasionally I'll be the only woman in a room.
Mm.
I have sometimes been representative of like UN projects or even NASA projects, and I'm the person in charge, and I'm the only woman who has any power in the room. And
Yeah.
it's just yeah, I feel like Johnny Cash. I feel like I walk the line, like I have to very, very carefully walk the line. Um,
Yeah.
because I hold the power, but I also don't hold the power.
Yep.
And I have to understand, cultural cues and things. I will not pour anybody's tea. I will not pour their coffee, you know. Will I walk over and hold a door for them? Absolutely. If they're
Yeah.
polite to me in a way that is gentlemanly in their culture, will I say thank you and be appreciative? Yes, I will. Yeah, because that's just um those are kind of
Being a
like,
decent
yeah,
human
those are
being.
soft skills. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, it's just being human. Um because I don't think they're doing it to be rude to me. If I thought they were being rude, I could be able, I would tell, but in
Yeah.
general, yeah. And I
It's just
think
about etiquette.
it's about etiquette, yeah. I think maybe being from a southern state in the US was good training. I mean, even when I'm saying things that people don't like, I'm saying it in what sounds like is a polite way. Um,
You
and
guys have that down to an art form.
yeah, yes, yes. And I have okay manners. I wouldn't say I have great manners. I mean, I'm not a debutante or anything. I am from the Appalachian Mountains. I'm not from a place where people have like cotillions or anything like that. So I don't maybe have the nicest table manners. That is an interesting thing I've noticed because I grew up in the country where people don't they you don't need them, I would say. But you can pick that stuff up, right? You can learn that. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know how to use chopsticks until I was like 18, and I flew to
Mm.
China for a summer, And I learned very quickly how to use chopsticks. Like within 3 days, I was good because I needed to
That's
use
amazing.
them, right? Once you need
Yeah.
to, you learn them. Yeah. And that was the custom, and I struggled, and then I picked it up, and it was good. It's fine. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yes, okay, long story short is I said yes, and then from there, because I'd been in spaces with policymakers, I was occasionally asked to come back. I have a policy about this. If I'm not the right person, I will tell people, "Oh, that's
Mm.
very kind. Actually, you should ask this person."
Yeah.
Or if, I have a conflicting personal or professional reason, I'll be upfront with people and say, "Oh, I can't make it. You need to ask this person. This is the person I would
Mm.
recommend." And I don't know if that's like a form of humbleness as much as just collegiality that has
Yeah.
has kept the invites coming. So when I can say
Yes.
yes, I say yes if I'm the right person, if it's the right time. And if I can't, I get them to the right people or who I think the right people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been
Absolutely.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, and it's a really good skill to learn to be able to recognize these sorts of opportunities because if you're in early career, you want to say yes to everything, but at the same time you still need to be able to learn to curate the things that you say yes to because as you said, sometimes you're just not the right person for it. And even if you really want to try the opportunity, if it's not your space, you kind of just have to go, yeah, it's not my space, but here's someone who is.
Yeah.
And it does come around. And,
Oh yeah.
slightly unrelated to it,
Yeah.
but even in my own work, sometimes I get clients who come through and say, I want to get this done, but I'm not the person for this. This is cool. I like what you're suggesting, but it's not my space. But this person could totally look into it for you instead. And it goes around, it comes around, and all of those kind of circles and networking things kind of work out for you in the end because they know that you're happy to help, but you also know when to say no.
That's right. Yeah. It's a form, I think, of paying it forward. Just like you would pay
Yeah,
for, the next person's coffee and
yeah,
eventually it'll come back to you. Same way. And
exactly.
yeah, just pay it forward for other people and it will come back to you. Yeah. Um so my media family is actually um pretty political. And what I mean and I mean by that in American terms, like we talk politics, we all vote, we're all registered to vote.
Yep.
We all vote the same way. It's kind of thing. Um and And so from a very early age, I was paying attention to political races, from a local to
Hmm.
national scale. And and why I mention that is it's really helpful to understand who your civil servants are. People who are government
Yeah.
workers, who are there as professional um, ministers, who are there as professional analysts working for the government across different governments and administrations, are not politicians and they are not the
Yep.
same as political appointees. And it's
Mm.
very helpful, even though I know people sometimes escape to science because they don't want to be in politics. Um, it's very helpful to be able to distinguish those two, and to
Mm.
know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because they're the policymakers, and often the science that you're working on is actually very tightly bound to policy and economics and the way that your environment is governed.
exactly.
And I
Yeah.
mean, you yourself, you're in fire, you're in agriculture, and these things are very, very tied to economics and infrastructure and all the things that make our society run.
Yeah, and
So,
unfortunately,
yeah,
cultural
it
identity, right, which leads to political power. And
absolutely.
yeah, and
Yes.
so in any given day, I could be talking to a room full of people who we may not agree on anything, right? But we're trying to work for the same solution, for the same
Yeah.
problem. Yeah. Um, and that's uh and that's helpful as a scientist to understand that.
Yeah.
In the same way that I am upfront with um when with policymakers, I will also be upfront with politicians,
Mm.
and occasionally they'll laugh, they'll chuckle when I do this because I have had to talk to like US representatives and Senate offices and stuff. And it's probably they probably think it's funny because they think I'm gonna be kinda like a stick in the mud egghead from the ivory tower or something. Um, but it's also my way of like uh drawing a line in the sand. Like I know who you
Mm,
are. I know how you vote. I know what's up. And you've come to me today. So I'm going to tell you what is real, what is factual, what is data and
mm,
science based. And if you don't like it, I don't give a damn because that is the
yeah,
time that you gave me. Pardon my language, but and that I think even when they don't agree with me or they have different agendas, there is an appreciation uh, that I'm not there to help them spin anything. I'm not there to help them win anything. They came to me for information and I will give you the information. And that is it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is in a professional capacity because you are the domain expert and, what you understand of the domain is going to
Mhm.
help build this policy. So it's not, some of it is going to be about trying to please people, but at the
Yeah.
same time, the science is the science.
Science. Yeah. The
And
results are the results.
a
Yeah.
lot, yeah, it's the results. And it's not always going to be about sugarcoating it because, you know, you can't dispute what you found in terms of research because it's been done scientifically, hopefully. And it's not about, as you say, being a stick in the mud because you have data, you have the research, you also have options for solutions and a way to
Mhm.
move forward. And that's what you're there for.
That's right. Yes. If you were talking to me to check a box, like I do not speak to hear the sound of my own voice. We can end this now. Right. But if you want to hear the data, the results, the science, I'm here to tell you that. Yeah. Whether you like it or not.
Absolutely.
And sometimes people don't like it. Um yeah. Sometimes people don't like it. And but that's also the reality of um because I work at these intersections of climate and climate solutions. Like
Absolutely.
as we move forward with
And there's hard things to hear sometimes in these
yes,
areas.
it
It's just the
is.
nature of the thing.
Yes, this will make you uncomfortable. I say that to lots of people. This is going to make you uncomfortable. So, but here's what you need to hear. Um, yeah. I've had some really interesting conversations recently with people in the private sector as they start to think about how are they going to build resilience um, into their business models so that climate change just doesn't like drink their milkshakes. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and so it's been very interesting to observe those conversations, to occasionally offer up data or insight, but not to give them opinions because I'm just kind of there to observe and to point them to the right data or studies. But it's interesting to hear private sector, from startup all the way up to multinational corporations, starting to think the same way as policymakers. Okay,
Yeah.
how are we going to do the right governance in our structures? How are we going to think about social implications? How are we going to have the right environmental considerations so that we don't go bust? So that we have
Yeah.
a business case in 10 years. And I think that um I know that's not new, but I would encourage um scientists right across STEAM, right, to be open to this.
Mm.
You don't have to necessarily work for private sector to even just be there as someone who can help. Though of course, private
Yeah.
sector positions are that is a great STEAM career to have, you know. Um
Yeah.
we haven't talked about this, but I don't like this idea that there's only like one pathway for scientists and technology and
Exactly.
yeah, I don't like this idea. This is a bad idea. Um Partly because universities globally kind of failed the COVID tests. So they didn't really stick up for their faculty, staff, and students. So it's kind of hard to convince people, I think, unless they feel very driven, committed to scholarly
Yeah.
work and teaching to keep going. Um, but I do think that that this is another example where working with private sector and the nonprofit space, you can help guide policy too. You're just doing it from a different way. These people also have influence.
Well, if enough business owners end up being interested in these sorts of things, and it's starting from the ground up,
Mhm.
because yeah, sure, governance and policy and actual speaking to politicians is a route for whatever science or work that you're in. but it's about the constituents, right? So all the people who are going to be voting for these governments, if you get them interested in the
Right.
policy, if you get them thinking about the way policy affects their business and their bottom line and their survival, that sounds mercenary, but still, it's the same sort of thing. You're getting them thinking about the things that matter to them
Yeah.
in a scale that's slightly bigger than who they are, and that's how you drive policy at a higher level as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that, I would just encourage early career folks. I would encourage, women. I would encourage LGBTQ scientists, engineering, everything, that they not shy away from these opportunities. I know it's tough because the world seems like a anyway, I think we live in a world where a lot of people feel like they don't belong,
Yeah.
and we absolutely need everybody who wants to be in STEAM to be there, right? Like, we need
Mm,
them, we need you in this space, and we don't need someone else, we need you, and we need you how you
mm,
are, so come to us, and I guarantee you that, other people wanna hear from you too. Policymakers, private sector, nonprofit, students, right? That and your future colleagues. Um, so my hope is that, that kind of message of, if you're here and you want to be here, great, you belong. That's it. That's like
absolutely.
very simple. Who
That's the
belongs?
message.
You belong. Yes. You can eat lunch with us.
Exactly.
Yes, come eat lunch with us.
Absolutely. So backtracking more than just a little bit.
Okay.
But, fire and agriculture is, such a topical field of study. But what drew you to wanting to look into these areas anyway?
I'm from the Appalachian Mountains in Kentucky, and I grew up, I like to tell people I grew up on a farm on a mountain in the middle of a national forest, which is true. And my parents, raised myself and my older siblings, in some of the older traditional ways. So, living off the land, growing crops, I have cut down trees, I have killed chickens. I've been hunting, I know how to fish. I'm a good person to know if a zombie apocalypse happens, is what I'm saying. Um, and so I was around forestry, I was around agriculture, I saw and helped with prescribed burning. I lived through wildfires as a child, and as a teenager, because they're common there. Not like California where you can get them every year, but every 3 to 5 years, there's gonna be a wildfire. And so,
Yeah.
you live with that reality. And when I had the opportunity, when I started learning about satellites and I started learning about, geospatial and computer mapping and data, and I was really late to technology and the internet. Like, I really didn't have a computer in front of me until high school. Um, I I just I had other things to do. I had places to be outside and, like, um, I had tobacco fields to work in, soccer games to play and stuff, but once I got into it, I loved it, and I still do. I still love it. I still, every day I look at a satellite imagery, like, every day. Every day I'm looking at satellite imagery, even on the weekends, because I enjoy it. I find it relaxing. Um, and once I realized that I could combine the technology with this, like, local traditional knowledge that I had gotten from my family, and that I was living, that was it. That's all it took. It was like, "Oh, great. I
That's
don't
awesome.
I don't have to be I don't have to give up this part of me that I don't wanna give up to be someone who I want to be."
Mm,
I have had to make hard choices since then. Like, I can't have my career and still live back home in Kentucky. That would have been nice,
yeah.
but it's not a possibility. So I have tried to stay as close as possible. Um, but of course, still doing a lot of international work as needed. I've cut down on travel in recent years because of small child and
For reasons.
also, yeah, COVID, and then, and carbon, it too. I really
Yeah.
do think travel should be, there should be a reason. I don't
Yeah.
travel for vacations. I try to do staycations or short. short distance things. Um, so so that's really how I got into geography. And then when I entered university and I realized that geography was the discipline where I could um I could study the environment, but I didn't have to ignore humans and I could include data and
Yeah.
technology in it. That's really why what drew me to it. Because there is no, besides Antarctica, there's no place on this earth where humans aren't a part of the ecosystem
Yeah.
and a part of the landscape. And so trying to think of nature as being this place devoid of human beings is just I don't know, some old colonial ideas of right of continents and landscapes, and that's just not reality. And so
Mm.
so that's why I stuck with geography, and I didn't, you know, I took ecology classes, and I've been employed as a field ecologist, and because I can learn plants and ID vegetation, you know, things like that. But geology I've always found interesting, and I've worked a lot with geoscientists, including volcanologists. But geography is my home because it's just it's where the world is. I get to study the world, and I don't have to leave
Yeah.
anything behind, and that's nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. So
And
that's how,
it's so
yeah.
cool because, yeah, and it's awesome because, geography is so much more than just the land. Like you said, it's about the people as well. And, a lot of the work that you covers, you know, fire affects so many things. Like it affects the people, affects the agriculture, affects the land, and affects the way that we use the land. And
Plus, people are mainly causing the fires, right? Like,
yeah,
lightning is less than 10% of
absolutely.
fires, you know? So, it's mainly
Yeah.
humans. Yeah.
It is. And you can learn a lot from the way people make fires.
Yeah.
Not in a pyro way. But yeah, you learn so many things about the way that people interact with nature in this way as well, which is very awesome. So, what sort of work are you doing specifically with fire and
Sure.
agriculture and ecology?
So, let's see. So recently I've been working on things like, um, if we wanted to use different historical and current satellite, what we call time series or archives. So just think like kind of 1990s forward to understand what landscapes are burning and who might be burning across the entire Arctic, right? So how could
Yeah,
we use the satellite data and then link that to what's actually happening on the ground? So which ecosystems, which trees are burning in the boreal, which tundra systems are most likely to burn? Where is the peat? And then when the ignition is happening, who has caused the ignition or what has caused the ignition? So trying to link the satellite data to the actual ground-based
mm,
fire regime. We call it a regime. But that's everything, like the timing, the ignition, the fuels, the vegetation, how the fire spreads, and then using kind of our eyes in the sky to understand that. So that's one of the projects I've been doing. The Arctic Council is on pause because of the war in Ukraine. Some of this work was Most of this work had started beforehand, and I had been working
hmm,
in Eurasia and North America in these systems since about 2008. So I was able to keep that going. More recently, in the spring, I spent almost 3 months in Finland, and I worked with my Finnish and Nordic colleagues, um, working with them because they have a lot of expertise there on fire, where they
hmm.
actually want to reintroduce prescribed burning. So, not too dissimilar
Interesting.
actually to Australia, where there have
Yes.
been some less extreme events than Australia, but some extreme events, and definitely some understanding that maybe they have overmanaged the land and removed fire from the landscape in such a way that it has, decreased the ecological functioning. It's hurt biodiversity. It's potentially even causing more carbon emissions because it's not allowing for peat systems to rebuild and respond. And
Yeah.
um, and like in the high northern latitudes, particularly as we get closer to permafrost areas, it really matters how we manage the land. And we have to figure out how to get along with each other. Um, at this moment, there's going to be one country that's not going to be a part of this conversation, but you know, as I like to say, and one of my colleagues, his name is Justin Fain. We used to work together. He's now at NOAA. But one of the things we used to say is that Russia is most of the Arctic, but not all of the Arctic. Right? Not all of the
Mm.
Arctic is Russia. Russia is just most. So like a little under 60%. But still, there's all this other part that has to be saved, that has to be worked on. And so it's really important to understand these impacts on the Arctic and this transition between the boreal and the Arctic, and how our management of fire will impact those to release even more carbon from the ground, right? As
Yeah.
it thaws, um, or just because we've mismanaged timber and energy extraction. Um, and then recently, and this is just in the last couple of years, it's happened during COVID. As we were working on this, it became quite clear that there were lots of first off, in the Arctic Council, there are 6 permanent indigenous participants across the Pan-Arctic,
Hmm.
and it was quite clear that they were holding on to cultural practices and wanted to continue these beneficial cultural practices of prescribed fire, of cultural burning. Um,
Yeah.
and and while we're parts of different working groups or expert groups, we also found the same results. Like these are things that should be happening. It's clear in the Western science that this needs to continue. And so one of the
Mm.
things I've been starting to develop, and it's a little slow, but I'm hoping to recruit some early career people to work with me in the spring. But is to think about trying to quantify across a landscape the benefits of this kind of early and late season cultural burning for
Hmm.
preventing extreme wildfires. And then
Yeah.
understanding the impact of these smaller fires on air quality, and just understanding what that means for like the larger, what we call short-lived climate forcers, which are essentially, if you can think of the black part of smoke, that soot,
Hmm.
that's black carbon. And when it is released in smoke early in the spring and it deposits on sea ice in the Arctic, it's actually warming the sea ice from the top as well. So, as you can
Hmm.
imagine, if you have a dark colored towel on a white sand beach, your
Yeah.
towel becomes very hot. Same thing
Yeah.
is happening to ice. So, climate change is kind of melting the ice from all around. And then this black carbon, because of the albedo effect, is also melting it from the top. And so, one of the things would be like to try to quantify the impact of these. And my
Yeah.
hypothesis is that there probably is very little impact because they're so low level burning, that low level energy, the power, the fire radiative
Mm.
power is so low that the smoke is probably not transporting. And so that's one of the things I'm working on, is like linking this human practice to this concern about air quality and of course sea ice melt. And I think my hypothesis my working hypothesis is that it won't be a big deal. Of course, we need to do the experiment, we need to do the research. So can't tell
Yeah.
you if I can reject or fail to reject that hypothesis yet. Um, and then and trying to do that in parallel, and if I can, in such a way where I'm collaborating with some of the permanent participants, like say the Gwich'in Council International, and such that they are also paid for their work, right? Because I really feel like
Mm.
anyone who's contributing to any project needs to be paid. Um,
Mm.
and a side note is that every student who works for me is paid from undergraduate level up. Like
That's
anyone who
cool.
comes and works for me must be paid, because I couldn't be in science unless people paid me. And so I feel like they must be paid. But that same ethos has to go for larger international and in just large group in collaborations. And particularly, I think it's not just that it's a sensitive topic, it's just that it's the right thing to do. If we're working with indigenous
Hmm.
groups, we should be paying them.
Yeah.
Like this is they're
Absolutely.
bringing very important knowledge to the table, so we should be paying them for that. It's not
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
You pay your
you
experts.
pay your experts. If you're in a consulting team and somebody adds even 10 lines of code, that's not for free. They get to
Yeah.
charge an hour or half an hour or whatever it took. So it's still, they need to be paid. So that's what I'm working on for fire right now. The second what I'm working on for fire is thinking about how to use commercial satellite data, so very high resolution data, And here I'm actually working in almost an exclusively all female science team, which I rarely get to do. So this has been quite
That's
a
cool.
pleasure. Yeah, it's very neat. So it's led by a colleague of mine at NASA Langley. Her name is Dr. Amber Soya. And we're trying to figure out if this very high resolution commercial satellite data can help us understand exactly how much human caused burning is happening in different ecosystems in North America. And
Hmm.
we're finding just orders of magnitude more fire when we use the higher resolution data, which we knew because
Yeah.
we had done field work. We were aware of this. But to be able to quantify it is really cool. And to understand how the commercial platforms might be useful for this is also a really neat application. And again, that kind of public-private partnership, like how can private sector help with climate solutions or understanding ecological management. And then for agriculture, right now I'm working with a large team led by a climate modeling group at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. But we're working with a large team across 4 countries in East and West Africa. And we're trying to figure out what near-term climate futures, how they will impact regional agricultural um, food security and food systems for 4 large cities.
Hmm.
So in Burkina Faso, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, and in Rwanda. And we are taking into account things like human health, the role of women. So if women do not have access to the right markets, to the right food systems, then it doesn't really matter if you're producing enough food. Families are not getting fed. And I
Yeah.
think that that's something that gets missed a lot in our conversations about like, will we produce enough food? Maybe, yeah, sure, but are we getting the food to the people, right? And then
Yeah.
and to be quite frank, like in general, mothers are the people who are feeding families, not solely, but oftentimes it is women who are making sure food is getting to families. So we want to try to
Yeah.
figure out the impact of that. So that's a really neat project, and I've been able to work with 2 PhD students who are from the global south on that project, including one from Africa, because we really wanted to um, we didn't want to do parachute science. I don't know, what is it called in Australia? You know what I mean? Like, we all have worked with African partners and have, given time and volunteered our efforts and expertise, but still, when you're working on these kinds of professional projects, you still want to be sure that you are training the best scientists and you're not leaving behind whole continents. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah. I understand what you're getting at.
yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah. You're just kind of dropping in, doing your stuff, but then they have nothing to work with afterwards, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. What was the point of that?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So,
Yeah.
so we've been very fortunate to be able to work with students from Algeria and then also Malaysia. So to try to kind of build up tropical and global south, scientists, future scientists who will be the leaders, in 10, 15 years. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah. And I think that's really important for, I can say, I guess with my NASA hat on, or just as a NASA funded researcher, as a US researcher, um, that if we're going to do these really cool NASA projects, it's great that we're also helping, of course, our home country, but our home planet. And our home planet
Yeah.
is everybody. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's always really nice to be able to, um, contribute to domestic things. I'm very passionate about it, but also I'm very passionate about this international cooperation because, Australia is not going to solve climate change on its own. Japan is not going to solve climate change on its own. Right? The US is not going to solve.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're going to have to do this together.
The cross-disciplinary collaboration for this is just amazing because, yeah, all the stuff that we do affects people, and people are all these other things. And yeah, being able to look at the way that culturally people use the land, or the
Mm-hmm.
way that society has evolved and developed in different areas because of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a big thing with the way that all of the science and the way that we use everything actually works.
Well, I think it matters. NASA's mission is, of course, gosh, I don't have it off the top of my head, but of course it is to to explore space and the universe and to understand the universe, but also to protect our home planet.
Yes.
And so that's what NASA Earth is often focused on. So we use a lot of spaceborne like satellites, and
Hmm.
NASA science and technology, but to protect our home planet. All that science and technology, of course, is going into lots of other directions, including um, being used by small businesses. It becomes open source to anyone who wants to use it.
Yes.
All the data is open and transferable. And I think that that's a really interesting change, and maybe you see this in your field as well. But
Mm.
this kind of idea of open source software, open source data, open collaboration, open platforms.
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't that long ago when satellite data used to cost as much as $1,700
Yeah.
per scene. Like
It
that is
wasn't long
before
at
my
all.
time. It's before my like
Yeah.
school days, but not by much. And
Mm.
so, I knew people in graduate school who were, years ahead of me, but they had to write grants to buy their satellite data.
Yes.
And like we don't do that. We never do that. So it was such a change. And
Mm.
now it's just, of course, companies share some of what they do. Maybe not all of it. No one's asking for all of it, but they share enough that there's this incentive to collaborate to build more, right? Because
Mm.
more collaboration, more access, it means, right, more honestly, like more business cases, more use cases for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't know what the data is going to be able to be used for. And, having open data, open systems, open infrastructure just encourages citizen science. So even if you're not a researcher, even if you're not practiced at, writing grants and applying for, special permits for doing things, you can have access to data and some people will just think about using it in a different way. And suddenly a new field of research comes into play.
Yeah.
And, it means that you're opening up all these opportunities for innovation to this massive range of people you didn't have access to it before.
That's right. And one person can't possibly have every idea for the use,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
as you open it up, you get all these other ideas and
Mm,
that's really interesting, right? And that's how we get innovation. So I
yeah.
think I'm really excited about that. There's actually NASA's doing a huge initiative to transform to all open science. So to all open source science, which I think
Shiny.
is great. It's
It
going to take a
is.
bit. It's going to take a little bit. It's not gonna be
Of course.
tomorrow. Give us a minute. But it will be something um that I hope is then, joined by other countries, and and then to have such like and then a global partnership around open platforms and science. I mean, wow,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that would be amazing. And I can say for fire that what happens in the southern hemisphere is really important for the northern hemisphere, right? Like our fire seasons, for example, El Nino, right? So the El Nino Southern Oscillation is often
Yep.
a predictor of fire activity, of course, in Southeast Asia and Oceania, including Australia, but then is also a predictor of fire activity throughout the Amazon and then into the Western US and Canada. And we wouldn't have known that if there hadn't been these massive collaborations across continents where
Absolutely.
people were sharing information about fire seasons and climate observations.
Mhm.
And so it allows us, like, if Australia has a significant extreme fire season, unfortunately, it always seems to start around Christmas time. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Summer.
yeah, summer, summer in the southern hemisphere. Yeah. Then that's usually a warning to us. Okay, we're probably going to have an extreme summer season too. So we
That's
need
fascinating.
to start working. Yeah.
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 So, what's the relationship there between what happens in our fire
Mm.
season versus what happens in your fire season?
So as I understand it, and I'm sure we'll get some climate specialists who will comment. So please correct me And so climate specialist if I'm wrong in the comments, but generally La Nina, which is when INSO is not flaring up, when the water is not warm. So when the water is cooler in the Pacific, it tends to make for wetter summers in Southeast Asia and Oceania. It also makes for wetter summers then in along the Amazon, along the equator, and then into the northern hemisphere when our summer comes. El Nino is the opposite, such that you will have your first dry summer, tend to be dry, extremely dry summers. And so will we. But
that makes sense.
Yeah. But we've had this then wet winter, and then El Nino shows up, and that wet winter means that we've had fuels, we have vegetation buildup. So it tells us
like, it gets dry,
okay,
a lot more.
Exactly. And then we have bigger fires. So if we watch the southern hemisphere's fire season, which is our winter time, but your summertime, then we know, okay, it's extreme. We have a likelihood of having a similar extreme fire season.
Yep.
Same kind of dry weather patterns will set in. Prepare now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's how. Yeah. It's I mean, it's, of course it's not 1-to-1. It doesn't always happen. And then I think what's really interesting is a lot of our satellite systems now, and this has been cooperation between, of course, observations from Australian scientists, but also NASA and ESA, the European Space Agency. But the last extreme fire season in Australia in 2020, I believe 2020, there were these huge streams of smoke up into the upper troposphere that ended up circling around the planet a few times.
Right.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
And that causes lots of interesting potential for global climate. Like it can seed storms. It can cause cloud condensation nuclei to cause different types of cyclones and hurricanes. So it can cause deposition of smoke onto the glaciers in the Andes, causing melting there. Like it's a very interesting kind of global system, and I think that's really the power of satellites. That en masse, right now that we have these huge data systems and cloud-based servers and ability to do rapid data visualization, is that we can see real time these global systems linked to each other.
That's so cool. I can see why you spend a lot of time looking at this stuff.
Yeah. But it also means that we're connected. And I think that maybe, I'm looking for sometimes these physical and meteorological mechanizations. But to me, it always just feels like, I have a good friend who lives in New Zealand. And so sometimes it's like, she's American, but she married a Kiwi. So it's like it's a very interesting, like, I can kind of feel more connected to her when I look at the satellite imagery.
Yeah.
Or like, sometimes I look at the satellite imagery and I feel connected to my colleagues in Finland because I'm looking at Finland. It's like, oh, I could just send them a message, or I haven't really been able to reach some of my Russian colleagues in Siberia. It's probably not wise to reach out to them now. It might cause problems, but sometimes I look at the satellite there and I think about them and I think about
about them.
Yeah. And I hope they're well. And I hope in the future we'll be able to work together again. But then also I look at satellite imagery of what's happening in Ukraine and I think about that there are some terrible consequences and some some pathways I hope we don't go down as a globe. So so I think that's like when I look at the satellite imagery, it's not just for these physical mechanization, which I've been trained to do, but it is linking
it's about the connections.
Yeah, it's about the connections.
Yeah. And for a lot of these things, because they're so far away, like it doesn't matter whether it's war or anything else, you feel distance from it. But looking at the satellite images and the data, it connects you because it makes you feel that there are more connections there than there were before.
We're not that far apart, really. I mean,
Yeah.
I always say it's a small world. You're usually only
Yeah.
like what, 10 connections from somebody, truly. True,
Yeah. I think
Like,
it
yeah.
used to be 6 degrees of separation. I think that's actually shrunk a little bit more. I don't know what the current number is.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's so
Yeah.
small, really. Um, and and yeah, I mean, I think I would hope for some people I know that this would help them think about solutions and policies differently. I
Yeah.
think that it's a mistake to think that all people are like this. Some people are not wired this way. And there are people who truly have authoritarian personalities, and we just all kind of need to like realize that that's a part of human civilization. They're not the
It
majority of
is.
people, but they're there, so we have to talk louder than them. Right? Um,
Yeah.
but I think more of us can be reached through the connections than the ones who crave sameness and order and one single authority.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, and I guess like geography is not a very good discipline now, modern geography, I say now, um, to be that type of person because to be this type of single-minded, sameness, order person because you get trained to very quickly see connections, right? That things
Yeah.
are connected to each other, that people are connected to each other, that landscapes are connected to each other. And I've had the privilege of being, in parts of Russia where I'm like, "Oh, man, this could be Alberta." It looks like Canada to me. And then, and I've been in parts of, like, northeastern Quebec, and I thought, "Man, this looks just exactly like the Great Lakes in Michigan," right, in the US, and it's
Yeah.
like, um and even when I was in Finland, I was like, "This could be Michigan." Like, it just felt like I had been in this place, and, but similarly, I'd been to parts of, Chile and South Africa look very similar, like, um, and 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 it's ki like, I see that as, like, kind of a gift, like, we actually live on we have this really interesting planet where because of the geography and the geology and the climate, we tend to repeat ecosystems, and isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is cool.
It is cool that we can go
Yeah.
and see these different but then we still have different people, and there's different cultures and customs and animals, um, yeah. I still think when I was a child, one of the things that blew my mind was a platypus, because I was just like, "That's not real." But it is real, and it's amazing, it's an amazing
Yep.
thing, yeah. Of course, what's interesting to me is that Europeans find do you know this thing between North America and Europe is this idea of a moose versus an elk? Have you heard this debate? This is a
Yes, I have heard this debate because
okay.
I do remember making this idle inquiry once in my head, thinking, what's the difference? And I looked it up and went, okay, backing away now.
Yes, yeah, okay. So the main difference is just that in North America, we have a secondary large deer, and that is called an
Hmm.
elk. And then the very largest thing is called a moose, and it's based off an indigenous word for this animal. And in Europe, they call the very largest animal an elk because they don't have this secondary large deer. They just have a smaller deer. So they have deer and elk, and we have deer, elk, moose, and that's
Yep.
it. But it's such a weird essentially we have very similar animals except this one this one deer. This one also large deer. So but yes. And it's like how reindeer and caribou are not quite the same.
Mm.
Because reindeer are slightly tame. They're not wild, but they're not really pets. They're tame-ish. And I can say as someone who has encountered them, they're kind of tame, but like caribou are wild animals. Caribou are not coming near you. They're yeah.
Yep.
Or if they do, like you need to rethink your position at that moment because you probably do not want it that close to you. Or it could be hunting season and they're very delicious. So you could think about, taking advantage. Um so they are very, very different, but still similar. And it's interesting that we have I don't know, these shared landscapes, right? So we have a shared
Yeah.
planet, we have shared landscapes. Yeah. And that's what's really cool about geography. Um and I know it's an old science. It's one of the first sciences, right? The study of the earth. And yet it still persists
Yeah.
because
It's
we
always changing.
yeah, and we are products of this earth. This is our
Mm.
home. And so it's essentially the study of home. It is home economics on a global scale, really.
That's a great way of putting
Yes.
it. Because it's incredibly accurate.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great space to be in because there's just so much to it, as we were saying before, that, it's cross-disciplinary. You're looking at so many aspects of the way that not only is, the natural landscape, but the human landscape as well. And, just having you explain all about the uh, climate systems just then, it's like, that puts so many additional pieces together that I hadn't put together before. Like this makes so much more sense because, I was thinking, the boreal region, why is that so specific about the fires in that area and why we need to look into that? And then you're explaining about the climate systems. Like, I see, right? Okay, so because of all the stuff and the melts and
Right.
exposing more combustible matter, is like this becomes a massive issue because all this permafrost region is suddenly impacted by the fact that there's not so much permafrost.
That's right.
And it's like, right, makes sense now. All of it's coming together.
So the human species is somewhere between 500,000 and 700,000 years old. I mean, it's still up in
Mm,
debate, but we're at least 500,000 years old. There's permafrost that's over 750,000 years old.
yeah.
So there's frozen soil in the high northern latitudes that's older than our species.
And yeah, it's those kinds of numbers are so hard to fathom because we don't normally work in those numbers.
No, no, I've heard someone call it deep time or deep ecology. Um,
Yeah.
and I will say that during lockdown, one of the things that I would do to keep sane, because my young child was then a toddler, has become a child, but the was that mama would go on hikes, and I would go
Yeah.
fossil hunting, and I would find uh, these the only carnivorous coral from the Ordovician period. So they're 450 million-year-old
That's
coral.
cool.
And I would just pick them up and I would just look at them and I would think like, this is 450 million years old. This is my species is a fraction of the age of this thing from an ancient seabed at a time when the continents we live on now were one. Right.
Yep.
Um, so this too will pass, right? This too shall pass. This is and it was how I would like keep my sanity a little bit because these
Yeah.
things yeah,
Perspective.
that time felt long. It felt I think humans are we don't do well with uncertainty. I think I'm trying to be like
Everything is uncertain.
I'm trying to be kind about this. Let me be generous. We don't do well with uncertainty. And so when people do ask me, like, well, what do you think about climate change? And, do you have any hope left? And it's like, well, I'm not really giving up. I don't know that I'm really not the kind of my personality is such that like I'm not a very optimistic person anyway. So like you shouldn't come to me looking for
Very
hope.
pragmatic.
Yes, I'm a very pragmatic. Yeah. So but what I think the perspective we should have is that our ancestors had lives that were harder than the ones that we have. And no, it's not easy right now. And uncertainties sucks. But just like suck it up and do the work and and hope that it gets better, but it only gets better because you're doing the work. So
Yep.
that I mean, I don't yeah, I guess the Buddha says the only way out of pain is through it. So
Yes.
I think that we're just in this moment of I guess what Gen
Finding a path.
Z, yeah, would call the millennial pause. Is what I hear. But we're in a moment of pause where the world is trying to figure out do we go through it, and the
Mm.
the real the real thing is that, like, that's actually our only option. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's a fine option to have. We can make it through it. It's
Mm.
just, we made it through the first 2 years of COVID. This next year is probably, you know, let's hope, knock on wood, that it's better. And but it isn't the first 2 years, like, it's
Mm.
yeah. And even if things look bad at times, they're not gonna look like they did then. And I
Yeah.
think that there's, like, a knee-jerk reaction to be like, "Don't talk about it at all because I don't wanna think about those bad times." Um, and and that's, like, that is an understandable trauma response. Like, just like,
Yes.
but it isn't how we're actually gonna keep managing, things.
Yeah.
And so,
That's a short-term solution.
that is a short-term solution for a long pandemics are a long-term problem. And climate
They
change is a
are.
long-term problem, but it's also an opportunity. Like,
Mm.
it is an opportunity for everyone to stay connected and be connected and make decisions and plans that are connected. Um,
Mm.
yeah. Like, I'm not someone I think we should all travel less. I don't think we should never fly again. I do not see the purpose. I do not think it serves the world to be in a place where we do not talk to each other or meet each other or
Yeah.
know that we are more similar than we are, different. You know what I mean? Like, I think that
That's
seems
right.
like a dark age to me. But we should still try to cut carbon emissions as much as possible. And so, of course, it's gonna mean a little bit of travel here and there. But, and that's okay,
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I think too, for diversity and equity and inclusion, that all scientific conferences should have an online option. It does not make
Yeah.
sense to suddenly decide everything has to be in person again. Like, it's just
Yeah.
people have families. They have to take care of loved ones who are ill. They themselves are immunocompromised or are not in a position to afford to travel. Like, just give them the option to connect online.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, you're opening up access to knowledge to a wider range of people.
Mhm.
And, again, it's about the open systems and, encouraging things like citizen science. If you open up conferences of all sorts, it doesn't have to be academic, just any sort of conference that you're holding for your specialist topic, being able to open up an online option gives a lot more people the ability to participate and contribute, even if, not as, speakers,
Yeah.
as guests, because they're still part of the broader community
That's right.
and it still gives them the opportunity to share in that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, when did you start this? Did you start this over COVID or right before COVID or
Haha.
yeah.
It's funny because I started it in May 2020. So it was during COVID.
Yeah.
It wasn't intended to be a COVID thing. It was only then because it was a procrastination thing, because it took me a year to finally go, right, I'm going to do something about this. And I chose a really bad time because it was at the time when there was a shortage in all the equipment you need to be able to do online video stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was fun.
We went through a shortage of, like, I know someone who waited 6 months for a laptop, and I don't mean, like, a special
Yeah.
laptop, just a laptop.
Yeah, just a laptop.
Yeah, yeah, just a laptop, yeah. Couldn't get it.
Yeah. Webcams and microphones and anything to do with kind of online communication. There was just shortage everywhere. Couldn't get any of it. And there were at least 6 month waiting periods. It's like, fabulous. I shouldn't have procrastinated. This is my penance for having to procrastinate this.
Yeah, yeah. But here you have it, right? And then
Absolutely.
I have to say, I do occasionally get asked to do in-person things, and I'll do them, the ones
Mm.
I think are, where there's mutual benefit. Um, but when people ask me to do the online ones, I almost always say yes because I know that it's gonna be more democratic in a way. It's gonna be open to more
Yeah.
people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, sure.
And yeah,
Yeah,
this is exactly
yeah,
it.
yeah, so great, let's do that. Definitely.
Absolutely. So we can probably start to wind up now because it's getting late for you.
Yeah, it's good.
So, yeah, some of those other soft questions. What hobby or interest do you have that's most unrelated to your field of work?
Oh. So I'm actually kind of a dancing fool. Like I love to dance.
Ooh,
And
yeah,
I will take any dance class. I used to teach like a fitness dance class.
that's cool.
Love Zumba. I love Latin dance. Um, I've even taken like Arabic folk dance and even like, belly dance, which I know is not maybe copacetic, but still
Come on.
fun.
If you're enjoying it, what's
Yes.
yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to avoid as much as possible cultural appropriation, but it is I love it. I love dancing. And I'm really good at it. And yeah, and that has nothing to do with what with anything I do in my
That's
science at all.
awesome.
Yeah, and people are usually a little when my colleagues see me dance, like, they're a little shocked, I would say, that I can like keep up and stuff. And then, yeah, and my students will often be, like, surprised that I can, like, mimic their TikTok videos or whatever, so it's
Hey,
just
that's a skill.
yeah, 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 yeah. I have the rhythm, is what I would say. I was born with the rhythm or whatever. Yeah, so
That's
that's
cool.
that's my hobby that is unrelated to, my day job or my life job as being a mom, right? So, is that
Yep.
I'm a dancing fool. I love to dance. Yeah.
That's awesome. I
Mhm.
love that.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And it takes, it's a skill, but it also takes a lot of courage and just self-confidence to be able to do that. And I know because I've done a few different dancing things over my life,
Yes.
and it's hard because I feel very self-conscious and I need to get over it.
Oh, what's funny is when I'm dancing, I don't feel any self-conscious at all. I'm not.
That's
I'm
cool.
just
I'm
it's just
envious.
me and the music. Yeah. And I don't care what people think and, like and I even learned, like, as a child, I learned some traditional dances, which is, you might not know this, but it's called clogging, but it's, like, what happened to
Oh yeah.
Irish river dance and when it got stuck in the
Yep,
Appalachian Mountains,
yep.
yeah. And then I learned how to do, like, some barn dancing and line dancing, and things like that, but,
I think we all did that at some point.
yeah, yeah. But I like, I love all forms of dance and yeah, and I just I don't care what people think when I'm dancing at all, like, at all.
That's cool.
Yeah. I'm
That's
not
awesome.
normally
Love
like
that.
yeah, so when I'm giving a talk, I'm normally like, how does everything look? How's my hair? And when I'm dancing, it's just,
Whatever.
whatever. Yeah, the spirit takes me, and then it's fine. Yeah.
Love it.
Mhm.
Cool. And which childhood book holds the strongest memories for you?
I've read so many books. What's funny is that as an adult, I don't read fiction anymore. I only read
Because you're busy
nonfiction.
reading papers.
Yep. Or I read nonfiction when I like listened. I do a lot of audiobooks when I'm walking or hiking. So I really liked, let's see, as a child, oh man. Okay. To be quite frank, the first book that came to mind was that I had this children's illustrated Bible when I was a kid, and I would
Ooh.
read it just front to back, just constantly. Um, and like, and I say this is like I got kicked out of vacation Bible school because I kept asking where the dinosaur. Yeah. I kept asking where the dinosaurs were in the Bible, and then it was funny. It was actually like a
Ooh, you were
distant.
that kid.
Yeah, I was like, yeah. And then my distant cousin was actually teaching the class, and he kicked me out. And then my older siblings like got mad at him, and then so my mother like comes to pick us up, and we're sitting on the stairs of the church, just sitting out there waiting for her. And she's of course like, okay. You're supposed to be inside, not yeah. But what's funny is I was just home and I saw that book and I thought about bringing it with me to give to my child. So when she starts reading, she could read it if she wants. And it's just that the illustrations stick in my mind. But also, I
Mm,
will say this, it has come in handy a few times as a scientist to be well versed in a
yeah.
religion, in a major religion is what I would say. So I'm
Hmm.
from like a Protestant Christian background. because there have been times at at scientific conferences when like street side preachers have tried to like say mean things to scientists as they're walking by, and I can just be like, let's do this, right? Like, you tell me where in the Bible does it say this, right? Because it doesn't, it doesn't say it. But that book sticks with me because of the illustrations. I looked at it, I don't know, 10 or so years ago, and the illustrator had actually gone t to an archaeology program, and so a lot of the drawings were trying to be realistic of, like, Hebrew and Aramaic cultures at the time, and
That's
also, like,
cool.
what Roman and Greeks, yeah, it would have looked like, and so it looks, and the other thing is that the people aren't white in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, Jesus is
They were trying to be
a
historically
little
accurate.
Apollo-like. Jesus is a little Apollo-like, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, like, his hair definitely has, like, blonde highlights, and his eyes could maybe be darker.
It's
Um,
being a stylist.
yes. But, but I remember distinctly, like, the David and Goliath and, like, the Delilah and Samson and them having, appropriately colored skin tones for people from that region, And
Yeah.
anyway, so that book always just, like, stuck with me. But a couple of the other books that came to mind was, there's a book called Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, and it's a
Mhm.
book about, Black tenement farmers in Mississippi during Jim Crow, and it's told from the vantage point of their, I can't remember if she's 10 or 12-year-old daughter. I think about that now, and I think that maybe my 3rd grade teacher was much more radical than I thought she was. Um, but, to have us read
Just
that,
very subtly subversive.
yeah, um, it left us, like, a sense of, injustice with me.
Mm,
Yeah, that wasn't fair,
yeah.
and that's not okay. And so, yeah, so I really like that book. I really like that book. And then, I think it's called Lily of the Valley. It was a book about a young woman. I have to look this up. Now you're but I remember this book because she's a young woman in the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia, which I'm from Kentucky, but and it's like the 1960s, 1960s, because like they're getting electrification. I think that maybe people outside that of in the US and in the west of the world, like there are parts of the US that developed decades later than the rest of the country. And I just happen to
Mhm.
be from one of them. But like how like if there was extra food on the table, it had to go to the menfolk. That if the cooking needed to be done, she couldn't do her schoolwork and she needed to do that.
Mhm.
And that book always stuck with me because neither of my grandmothers really had a life that they wanted, because they weren't allowed to. And again, I think maybe it just kind of stuck with me as this like sense of like injustice. Like this
Mm.
wasn't fair. Yeah, that this wasn't fair.
At a young age, like kids develop this sense of injustice, and it's a very strong sense. And you don't like until you become a parent or you're around kids a lot, you don't realize just how strong that sense develops. And
Mhm.
it's fascinating when you start having these conversations with, your young kids and they start making asking these questions and putting these pieces together about things and
Yeah.
forming very strong opinions about them. And often they're very mature kind of thought processes that you're going through to get here from very simple ideas. And yeah, and often when you read books like that as a kid or as a young child or,
Mhm.
young adult, those senses just get fired again because you start thinking about putting all those pieces together as your worldview expands. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, and I can start to see that. We have some holidays in the US around, civil rights era and other prominent national leaders who weren't presidents. And
Hmm.
And I at a very early age started explaining them to my child so that she knew
Hmm.
why. Yeah, the why we
Yeah.
had them. And I wanted her to know that.
Mm.
And then she could she could just do with it what she wanted, but
Yeah.
I just wanted her to have it because I just felt
Yes.
like I think that people have sanitized Martin Luther King Jr. in a way that's not helpful, and then
Yeah.
and is also untrue. But
Mm.
then yeah, so then but the other thing is she hasn't asked yet, but she'll learn his life and his death,
Mm.
and I want her to know why that it's important. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and why he was
Yeah.
important, and his family, and and all these things. So, yeah, but I because I think because when I learned about it, it instilled in me a sense of injustice, and that I have not been able to move past, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. So, okay, other soft questions.
Other soft questions. That didn't go soft at all. Okay, so less soft, but still probably, it's all right. What advice would you give someone who'd like to do what you do, and what advice should they ignore?
I went to graduate school because I needed the money,
Yeah.
and I could make more money as a grad student than I could back home, just like working a job, and which I know was not the case for more grad students. So my advice is that if you want to do it, you should you should do it. There's no time scale. So the advice that you should ignore is that you should do it all in one go. I started a
Yeah.
PhD program at 23 because I had
Mm.
skipped a year of school, so I'd done everything early, and it has worked out fine for me. Um, but I wouldn't do that again.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't
You'd
do
get
that
a
again.
bit more work and industry experience before you did it.
Just
A break.
just break, just have more life, just yeah. I don't know. Also, maybe don't get married before you're 30. I don't. You know what I mean? Like I mean this. I have don't marry another PhD. Don't like um and again, this is all very like personal. I do know some couples who are PhDs and they're great and they've been able to make careers and it's no problem, but most PhD couples struggle. And even most people who have advanced degrees who aren't private sector will struggle. Right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's the reality. And then in private
Yeah.
sector is not a guarantee of a job either.
Mm.
Um it's a different system and you have to learn to roll with it, and
Yep.
I guess I would say if you're gonna the advice is if you want to do it, do it.
Hmm.
But don't take anyone's advice on like when or the trajectory or how or where. The only thing that really matters is that you make the right connections and network in graduate school and that you get out what you put in.
Mm.
And if and that means respect too. If you're putting in respect and you're not getting it back from your department, from your advisor, leave.
Yeah.
It's just
Because otherwise yeah, it has to be an environment that you feel safe and respected in. Otherwise, you're going to burn out.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
that's the worst thing after putting in so much time and you're like committing so much of your energy and your passion to doing a thing only to stick around in a space where you don't feel comfortable doing it.
that's right. Yeah. Um, and I think we live in a time too where people have to think about, if you're LGBTQ, you need to be in a place where you feel safe.
Yeah.
And if you're a person who can get pregnant, if you're a woman who's concerned about fertility issues, you need to be in a place where those things are going to be protected.
Yeah.
Because grad school is, god damn it, it's stressful enough. Like you don't need to be worried about those other things. So, um, I think sometimes people will give you advice like, "Oh, just get into the program that gives you the most money." Yes,
Hmm.
and it's a place you want to live. It's a place you can thrive. it's close to
You have to
family.
think about all the factors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, I don't. I'm the type of person who can kind of pick up and restart, because I've
Mhm.
had to do it, and I'm from one of the few migrant communities in the U.S. So like I know how to do it. Um,
Yep.
Most people don't like to do it and don't do it well, and like don't force that on yourself over and over and over
Mm.
again. Yeah. So like if you are settled in a place and that's the place you want to be, make that work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no time limit.
Ooh,
There's no
exactly.
hourglass. Yeah.
And just to elaborate a bit more about the don't marry a PhD, I'm guessing you're referring to like someone else has mentioned this before, and I've forgotten. There's a special term for it. The fact there's a term for it is quite concerning.
Yeah, the two
Where
body
you
problem. It's called a two body
thank you,
problem.
the two body
Yes.
problem. That's right,
Mhm.
exactly. Yeah, because you've got two people with possibly similar or very different careers in academia or high science or whatever you want to call it, and because you are now a specialist in your area, the number of jobs and the number of places these jobs are available are very limited. So if one of you wants to advance your career, the other one has to move. And yeah, it's such a challenging problem to be presented because you're you're
Yeah.
basically finding a partner in someone who's as high achieving as you are, which is both complementary and problematic at times. But then you also have to consider geography because in order
Mhm.
to advance, in order to be able to
Mhm.
excel in the space that you're in, you might have to move for it because we're not in a time and place where remote in these kinds of areas is a thing that can be done yet. So yeah, it's yeah, lots of different issues relating to the two body problem.
Yeah. I mean, it mainly impacts academics, but not only. That's right. Yeah. It
Yeah,
can, of course, people who are highly specialized in private sector and nonprofit as well, and they don't even
exactly.
have to have a PhD to do this. If you're highly
Yeah,
specialized, it doesn't really matter the level of degree. But for PhDs in particular, yeah, and I've
because
had
of
this.
academic
It's
placements.
it's academic placements as a two body problem.
Yep.
If you can, don't marry another one of you because yeah.
Not always an option, but
No,
a
no, no,
consideration.
it's not. No, I know. Yeah, I'm not telling you like don't marry the love of your life because of a two body problem. Um, but marriage is more than those first few years of romantic butterflies in your tummy. You know, it's
Mm,
there's more to it. And you're building a life together, and that means both of you have to feel like you have options. And
yeah,
so two body problem means that usually one person has an option and the other person is being dragged along.
yeah,
And it's while it's generally um in a heterosexual couple it's the woman, it's not always.
yeah.
I can think of of a colleague who has been fairly successful in negotiating a two body problem more recently, but what it has meant is that one of the partners, one spouse did not get a tenured position but rather a permanent teaching position, and that was not what they
Mm,
wanted, so they
no,
settled.
and it's hard because once you start to settle down, once you start to establish roots, it becomes a challenge to look for ways to advance your career
Mhm.
in various ways.
Mhm.
And yeah, having to negotiate that for
Yeah.
two makes that even more challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
like and I guess like full disclosure is I am married. People who follow me on Twitter might not pick that up because I don't talk about it. I don't talk about it because my um husband is very private, but
Mm.
also I don't think anybody needs to know. You know what I mean? Like
No,
I'm not
doesn't
on
matter.
there. Yeah, I'm not on there to meet people in that way. So I'm doing this as a professional and a professional way. So why does it matter? You know?
It's not relevant information.
No, no, it's not. But then but he does not have a PhD. And he has he has an advanced degree. He's very specialized. He works private sector. And we take turns focusing on career so that neither of us is doing like we're not doing job interviews at the same time kind of thing, but at the um but
It's like
it has allowed
rock, paper, scissors.
yeah, right. Yeah, like are you going to get that done? Am I going to get that? It's like pause, you do what you need to do. This is stable. Okay, you're good. Let me think
Mhm.
about something. And then what I can say is that having that situation has meant that I have better chips in which to play poker with employers because I don't have a two body
Yep.
problem. And so I
Mhm.
can ask for a much higher salary myself. I can demand moving expenses. I can, in an
Well,
academic
you
setting,
have
I
to
can
make it
ask.
worthwhile.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And then when they say, well, what about your spouse? I have to be like, don't you even wear your pretty little head about that? Like, that's not your concern. Because it's usually
Yeah.
men who are like, well, what about your, it's like, nope, he's not involved in this. This is all me. Like, so,
Mhm.
and
We've had our discussion. We know what our
yes.
thresholds and boundaries and things are.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and it's also meant that, and I guess and I will say this, like, because I don't have this other person, my career is not dependent upon my partner. I can
Mm.
negotiate for higher value for myself because there isn't this
Yep.
other person to worry about.
Yeah.
And 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 he can do the same thing himself and not have to worry about me. There's no ideal here. There is what
No.
works. And I'm just encouraging people to think like it might behoove you to think about ideally, does my partner need to have a PhD in the exact same field that I'm in, or can this be someone who's a good match, right? Intellectually and everything, but your careers require different things. They
Mhm.
require and then you can have a more symbiotic development of your careers and they don't need to follow the same system or the same timeline or the same trajectory. And
Yep.
that has been
Exactly.
helpful. Yeah. I'm just encouraging people to think broader. Yeah. I have
Yep.
a lot of close friends who are LGBTQ, and I often say like, but they have figured out a lot of things that the straights have not. Like they
Mhm.
tend to have because as a community they have developed um protocols around relationships and things like this that were kind of away from mainstream culture for a long time.
Yep.
That they know how to do a lot more negotiation and consent and boundaries and things like this. And we should also be talking about these things about like, okay,
Yeah.
what are the boundaries? What is our future? What are these things that are going to make our relationship work? Instead of thinking it's just happily ever after.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at other kind of, before people get married, sometimes they get told to speak to, some sort of, advisor, whether it's religious or non-religious, whichever
Hmm.
works for you. And often, even in Australia, you get handed this DVD, and it's talking about how you communicate conflict and all these other things, and having that
Who
talk
hands
about
who's
kids.
who's handing this? Who is giving you a DVD?
I think it's
Is
because
it
I'm not
Justice of
religious, so
Peace?
clearly it's a government thing.
Okay,
Like, I don't
okay.
know. But anyone who's a celebrant, or because you have to be licensed to do that
Right.
kind of thing, they hand this out when you book them
Yeah.
in. So yeah, it's interesting that society goes, okay, you talk about communication, you talk about kids,
Mhm.
but it's like, well, we've got to talk about career. We have to talk about how we communicate these sorts of things, how
Yeah.
you know maneuver these other aspects of life, which is part of modern life now. And yeah, so it's thinking broader, as you said, about all the different aspects of who you are and what makes
Mhm.
you you and what you want out of life, and being able to, negotiate all of that for both of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Mm.
think too, again, like, people who, I guess, follow me on Twitter or whatever are gonna be maybe a little surprised to know this, but, like, um, I have chosen to live a fairly traditional life because that's what works for me.
Mm.
Um, maybe my work and career are not, like, I don't inhabit a position in my career where I look like a traditional woman necessarily, but at home, we have a very equal parenting relationship, but, like, and we'd split some of the cooking and of course chores, but it's still like this typical traditional, mother, father, child,
Yeah.
like extended family. And because that's what I wanted and that's what works for me. And I don't
Mhm.
ever want anyone to tell me what I need to do to live my life or have my career. And I don't want to tell anyone else. And I want us all to be able to live in a world where we get to pick those things and be respectful of each
Yeah.
other. And what I find disheartening is that there is, and while it seems to be coming mainly from the older generation, it's there in the younger generations too. This idea that like maybe women shouldn't have these types of careers and things would be better. Maybe our couple, right? Maybe we should go back to these older ways of thinking about sexual identity and even gender identity, and things would be better. And no, it's not. Like instead, maybe we need people handing out DVDs where we can all just start. Maybe you need to talk about your expectations of your life and your career. You need to start talking to each other. Um, the DVD should be called "This is going to be uncomfortable," and then we can all just like be uncomfortable in this conversation. Um, but I am my concern, for STEAM moving forward is that we maybe aren't pushing back on these cultural forces that are trying to remove many of us from public life.
Mm.
Um, and uh, and like I don't necessarily want to be the public face of that like opposition to them necessarily. But if I have to, I will. Like I do not like this movement at all. And yeah, and I'm concerned. I am concerned that we just think that if we just show them the data that they'll just figure it out. But we don't live in a world where like people can live on one income anymore. Couples cannot live on
No,
one income. This is not reality.
exactly.
Um, and and it takes a village to raise children. So even if someone's
Mhm.
staying home, whichever parent is staying home with the child, you still need childcare. You still need other things. Um, so I think that I think we're avoiding some hard, uncomfortable conversations. I don't know. Does the DVD work? Does it make you have these conversations, or you just watch it, or do you
I
watch it?
think it varies.
Okay, all right.
It was a long time ago. I've forgotten if I did watch it. Probably
Yeah.
did.
They might make you
But
watch
yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah, it's a horse water drink thing, right? Like you give people the information, but it's what they do with it, and whether they have the conviction to kind of make the hard decisions about what they want to do and who they are and how they want to live their lives. Because yeah, they are hard decisions because you've got people from all around you from when you're a kid telling you, giving you advice, and a lot of it's well-meaning, a lot of it comes from the heart, but it's not always going to be applicable to you. And it's, understanding that that advice is advice. It doesn't mean that you have to follow it to the letter. And it's being able to, find out more about who you are and what you want that will help you move forward.
Or maybe so when you encounter those roadblocks, which you're going to encounter, you remember, oh wait,
Yeah.
I remember seeing that if I encounter this roadblock, that there are people I could talk to about this. Let's go find that DVD. Like that would be.
Yeah.
Wait, I don't even own DVDs anymore. So we're talking about DVDs, and I'm like, I don't. You know what?
I mean,
I do have a couple seasons of Kids in the Hall on DVD because I wasn't able to buy it on Amazon Prime until recently. But anyway,
maybe it's
okay.
just a link to a Dropbox now. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's like that's it. Yeah, go watch this YouTube video. All right. Any more soft questions?
Nope.
Soft
I think
questions.
that's it.
That's it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were gonna make me answer like, would you
Yeah.
rather fight 50, duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck? To which the answer
I
is
don't know.
always the 50 duck-sized horses. Like you never want like
Really?
ducks are terrifying. They're a
That's
horse-sized
pretty
duck.
bad. I mean,
Yeah.
geese are awful.
Mm-hmm. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Upsize the geese and then you got problems.
I mean, swans alone, right? Like swans are the best
Yeah,
example of why you
vicious.
don't want to make these things any bigger than they are. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah.
Well reasoned. I follow.
Yes. No,
Cool.
this has been wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I'm not too chilly. I feel pretty good in my winter clothes here. Early pre-Halloween freeze, I guess. Which is fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to round off, if people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go?
Oh, well, you don't have to find out more about me, but if you decide you want to, you can find me on Twitter until it's purchased, I guess, at j_McCarty_geo. I laugh, and yet I kind of mean it. You can also I have a well, we'll just see what happens to Twitter.
Yeah, we'll see.
You can also find me at jmccarty, MCCARTY, I will keep that
Nice.
personal website even when I join NASA, but it won't be updated too much, just an occasional blog post here or there. I am on LinkedIn, but you have to know me before I will accept. Just because I find that weird.
Fair.
Yeah, fair. And then you might find me on a local hiking trail or at some conference talking about fire, or on another steam-powered YouTube channel. But that's where you find me.
Nice.
And sometimes you
Amazing.
find me on a farm on top of a mountain in the middle of a national forest, or rather, you'll never find me there because there's no way you can find that place on a map. So,
yep.
Yeah. No
Cool.
way. Yeah.
All right. So thank you again. This
Yes.
has been such an amazing conversation. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you. All right.
I've loved speaking with Jessica about her work and the incredibly cross-disciplinary nature of the broader field of geography and seeing how it and we are all connected. To learn more about Jessica and what we discuss on the show, or to connect with us, please visit the Steampowered website at steampoweredshow.com. You can also find out more about Jessica at Twitter at JMCCARTY_geo and her website, the link for which will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let me know. Subscribe to the show, leave us a rating, and share this with your geeky or geek curious friends. You can also support Steampowered on Patreon and the Steampowered Show, the link for which will also be in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.